Welcome to another episode of the Seraphine podcast. I am Seraphine Arocha, your host for the Seraphine podcast, and today we have a power couple of Kansas City. It's Rachel Collins and Isaac Collins. Welcome, guys. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having us. We're excited to be here.
I am so excited to have you guys. Just a little background. I first met Rachel about a year or two ago through YPG, and we actually did do a podcast, and we connected on all things health and wellness, and we'll talk a little bit about that today, but we're going to dig a little bit more deeper with Rachel, especially when it comes to her relationship with Isaac and their partnership. They own now 3 Yogurtinis. Congratulations, business owners here in Kansas City. And they've been really involved in the recent events with the protests and with George Floyd, being small business owners and having a voice and an opinion that I think some people might not feel like small business owners have. And the stereotypes that go hand in hand, not only being a small business owner, but also having a religious background. So we've got a lot to dig into today. So I'm excited. So as we begin, how did the two of you guys meet? I'm going to start with Rachel because I know he's going to jump in.
I was like, all right, here goes that 45 minutes. We actually met at yoga on the lawn at the Nelson Atkins.
Nice.
Yes. So actually, my friend was hitting on him.
Yep.
And I was driving my friend, and so I was like, come on, wrap it up. Like, let's go.
Yeah.
And he was like, whoa, hey, what's your name? And I was like, yeah, you're cute. Okay, bye. Not interested.
I
was very much in like not in a place to date right then. I was like focused on me and what I was, building. And then he was persistent. He found me on Facebook and tried to pull it off as like I just popped up and, friends you may know thing. And I was like, nah, not falling for that one. But we re-met at church. We went to the same church. And so then we met again there, and the rest is history.
That's so cool. Well, I love knowing how people met because, I think Kansas City is like the smallest city, like what is that?
Smallest big city.
The smallest big city. Yeah. Smallest big city. And when I met my husband, I know that we knew so many different people, and we were, I had friends of mine who were like, I checked out your husband, before. And I'm like, what? I'm like, I don't want to know that. Yeah. Oh my God. So you were originally from Amarillo, Texas, but you're a Kansas City born and raised, right?
Yep.
So interesting. Have you had, as couples, have you seen like the Southern Texas girl come out ever? Or was she there long enough?
I don't see it at all in Kansas City, but when we go back to Texas, I see it immediately.
Yeah.
Like it slowly starts to come, but when it's there, especially when she's around her family. Yeah.
That is wild. And what about him? Is he like a Kansas City guy through and through?
Yeah. Yes. There's, very Midwestern. Like, I was actually talking to my mom the other day. She was talking about her and her husband were going to a rodeo.
Yeah.
And she was like, we need to get Isaac to a rodeo. I was like, I'm pretty sure he's been, but I don't think you're going to get him to go back.
Enjoy it? No. Been there? Yes, several times.
Yeah.
That's hilarious. Mm-hmm. So you guys met in a health and wellness environment. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty cool that you have those shared interests. Were you a yogi before?
Yes. So a lot of people don't know that actually. That I've been a yoga teacher for about 5 years.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Actually, I think I knew that, but I didn't recall it. So are you actively teaching now?
Yeah. So I actually got back to Kansas City from Iowa. I was there owning a different business, and then I started doing yoga immediately because I was just interested and I was curious. And about 3 months after starting to do it, they asked me to do teacher training. And I did it, started teaching the beginning of 2016, and we met halfway, 2/3 of the way through 2016. So interesting. Yeah. What
I love about the two of you is that you are people who are very progressive in the way of your thinking, you're open-minded, but you do come from conservative kind of areas of the country. Yeah. And you both, I know, have very cool stories that have kind of allowed you to be where you're at today, which are two people who I would say, maybe you can tell me you disagree, but you're pretty strong in your faith, correct?
Yeah, definitely.
So there's a lot of stereotypes with being Christian. What are things that you have found in your belief system of religion versus when you're being involved socially, if you're bringing in that awareness, what's changed? Has things changed or developed? Did you start out conservative? Did things evolve? Talk to me a little bit about where you came from and how you joined as a couple and how this is kind of has braided into your faith.
Yeah, so I would say for me growing up, there was always more of a focus on the spiritual aspect of it. Like growing up, going to a black church, being Baptist, the Holy Spirit is huge, Father, Son, Holy Spirit. We really, really focus on the concept of the Holy Spirit at our church. And so growing up, we always talked about like the spiritual aspect of it and what Jesus was actually teaching versus how we were supposed to act. So I guess that's like the spirituality versus religion. And I do think it's a way longer conversation, but I do think religion and the laws and the rules that come with it get people in trouble.
Yeah.
Because sometimes it's actually void of what Jesus is actually teaching. And so I think that's why we're different. The perception is we're like this religious people. We are so conservative. We have to follow these kinds of rules. And for us, it's community, it's people, it's serving, it's loving, it's helping people first. And if anything else contradicts that, then we rebuke that. And so I think that's why we're kind of like different from what people think that we believe and how we're going to act it out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I originally, whenever I was really young, went to a Southern Baptist church.
Wow.
And it's a little bit more intense than that. Like,
Yeah.
yes, Holy Spirit, but rules first.
Yeah.
So then we ended up going to a non-denominational church, which was a little bit more open, but still being in Amarillo, Texas, it's pretty like linear.
Yeah.
So then whenever I moved to Kansas City after I graduated high school, so I grew up in Amarillo, Texas, and then whenever I came here, I was exposed to a way more diverse group of people. I had never met a gay person before. We had people of color in our community in Amarillo, but not to that extent. And I had always loved people and knew that, God is love, and that's the most important thing about being Christian or whatever other religion you call yourself. That's the whole point, is to love each other, lift each other up. And so I had always had a little bit of an issue with that when I was growing up, knew something isn't right here for us to be criticizing the way that these people live their life. If that's how they live and they're not hurting anyone, what's the problem? And so coming here and then being exposed to different cultures just intensified that part of me, that I was just like, no, there's no wrong way to be religious. If you're loving people, you're doing it right. You have those Westboro Baptist people that claim they're following the rules of the Bible, but they're just so hateful, and I can't ever wrap my head around that.
It's complicated because if you really think about it, Jesus was a Jew, right?
Yeah.
And the conservative beliefs, if you go into Old Testament versus New Testament, it's how could this man even think the way he did?
Yeah.
And it's already based in a conflict of the soul anyway. Mm-hmm. And I've just been interested because, now that we're in this time of this election with Trump and Biden, I was sitting back and I was listening to this week. The podcasts are always a little bit past. So to kind of get you in the loop, literally, I watched last night Trump speak, and I've been watching the Republican convention all week long. And, the reason why I'm so fascinated by it is because I have family members that are Trump supporters. So I guess where my train of thought was going, I'm watching this Republican convention, and there's actually some beautiful testimonies from people who are of faith and speaking about violence that were done to their families on the flip side. And it was really tough to watch because I can really feel myself being tugged in this weird way of seeing. It's like both sides to both stories of the people who are participating in the protests, and then there are riots, and you have to really peel back the riots because there's a lot of different layers to a lot of different participants in rioting. And then there are the business owners. They're the people who want to protect their families, where they think that, a gun they should be able to have. And then as soon as a gun comes into the story, what does that do? And then there's, then there are people who are just there who just want their voices to be heard. So I guess my question to you two is, where do you find in your own community of faith? Do you ever find yourself feeling edited with some of the people in your because there's so many strong opinions, and you have to kind of pick and choose because they're exhausting conversations to have.
Yeah.
But I love the fact that I don't think you two are edited. I mean, I looked at your some of the stories that were up just in the last couple months with you specifically, Isaac, the Startland News, the Kansas City Business Journal, and KMBC. I mean, you got a lot of coverage, and you were pretty opinionated about it. So let's talk about that.
I think that for us, it helps that we come from a place of not being sold by just one ideal and running with it blindly. So in those articles that you read and whatnot, all the coverage that we've been getting, we're really speaking from our heart with how we feel on things. And so we don't agree along political lines. We don't agree along religious lines. Like, we don't just go with things because we're told that we have to believe a certain thing and say a certain thing or feel a certain way. And so that's why when you read those articles and, we have these thoughts and these feelings that are all over the board, is because, we are free thinking in that way. And I think that's one thing that I'm actually seeing that's wrong with our country right now, whether it's religious spectrum or political, and a lot of times they're mashed together, is we're doing a lot of groupthink. Like, the people we are associated with, how are they feeling? Okay, I'm going to feel that way as well. And I think that is really wrong right now, because I think that, like you were saying, I watched some of the convention as well, and both sides lied a lot and were saying things that were wrong. But both sides had some really touching moments as well of real Americans telling real stories that I could connect with. And so for me, it's not a Democrat thing or a Republican thing. It's the, what issues do we need to heal as a humanity, as people? Unfortunately, I think some of the things that were said in there were tactics more than actual real truths. Everyone feels their own way, but I know we don't support anyone who tears down humanity or tears down people or incites violence. And I know that our president does that right now. So me not liking him is so much less of him being a Democrat or a Republican, and so much more about him just not being a good person.
It's almost gaslighting to watch him, because it's like when somebody tells you, like, they've done something wrong, right? And then they tell you, well, that's not me. I didn't do that. And that was, they were kind of putting out this whole narrative of, we really don't know the real Donald Trump, right? And then I think about this movie I was talking to you about earlier, Loose. And this real sense of good versus evil, light versus dark. It's such a common theme. And scaring us, terrifying us of the dark. And making the light the only option. And I'm realizing more and more as I do this podcast, because I took it from a Rumi quote about the light being actually within ourselves, and we have to come out of the darkness in our own life to recognize it. I realize that the darkness is not always an awful place. And this movie Loose is about a couple that has the best intentions adopting a child from a war-torn place in Africa, and basically grooming him to be like an Obama type.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And him being a young man experiencing life and making decisions and having been through trauma, and making decisions out of trauma, and even with a therapist. Like we make bad decisions, but it doesn't mean necessarily that we're awful people. So then there's this like weird kind of play where you see someone like Donald Trump, and then you have it all week long being like, you don't know who he is. You don't know who he is. And I'm like, wait a second. I do know who he is, because for 4 years, this is what I've seen. But then the forgiveness in me, you know, that Christianity part of me is like, well, maybe I don't really know, you know, and that's where you're like, you know, that there is a difference when somebody is like, I own my faults. These are the things I've done, and these are the things I'm doing to change it. And I haven't heard that from him.
Right.
So for the two of you, was there ever a time in your life that you made bad choices and it turned you around, and you can really say, I own my bad choices, and this is where I've become a better person?
Oh Lord, yes. Like I was, whenever you're saying if, I was like, oh yeah, all the time. Yeah. I mean, once I moved here after I graduated, I kind of like, you know, was free from my parents. I'd also like gone through a lot of stuff leaving Amarillo, and I was just like, went wild, you know, as an 18-year-old, free of my parents, free of like anyone watching me. And then there's, you know, and I've been in the bar and service industry forever. And I grew up religious, you know, going to church all the time. And then whenever I came here, I stopped going, not because I was turning against it, but because it started out just simply not having a church home, not knowing where to go. But then it turned into, you know, I'm being exposed to all these people with different views. I want to check this out. I want to listen to this person. And it kind of just escalated into me just never going back. Well, you know, cut to 10 years later, I had experienced another like huge loss in my family, and I just decided like, oh, I can't do this by myself. I need to turn back to God. I need to get into a community that actually is like looking for something more than just partying, because that's pretty much what I was surrounded by, you know, like my whole 20s. Yeah. And so getting back into church, I was able to turn my life around, not saying like that's wrong that I was partying and having new experiences and whatever, because it's definitely not. I think it's important for people to do that. But for me to realize that that wasn't the healthiest choice for me, and for me to grow, I needed to, you know, let go of some things and even some relationships. And so yeah, I can definitely look back and own there's been, you know, people that I have hurt in those times where I was just like having too much fun and only thinking about myself essentially. And I can own that, and I can say like, I messed up and I was not in a good state, but now I am nowhere close to perfect. And I think like even just being married a couple of years, we're constantly learning more about ourselves and saying like, oh, I didn't know that I was still struggling with this part of myself or my, you know, but like marriage brings that out.
Yeah.
It does.
Certainly does.
It magnifies those things that you haven't necessarily recognized. And we do that all the time with each other. Like he might call me out on something that I initially maybe like, no, I'm not like that. I'm not like that at all. And then after like reflecting on it, I'm like, well, maybe you're right. I am like that. And I think, you know, it's important to be able to look at yourself and be like, okay, I still have stuff that I need to work on. Yeah.
I think that's
don't
all
know,
great.
may have,
You're
like
talking
taken
about,
off
like-
on that question.
Yeah.
You're talking about like relationships. There was like no relationships before me, right? I was like,
No.
like
You're like, there's none, zero.
No,
don't
yeah,
you love
zero.
that?
Don't
My
dig
husband
deep in
doesn't
there.
want, he doesn't even want to know.
I don't want to know.
I don't want to know either.
But he does.
Yeah.
That's the bad thing is as soon as he's like, who did you date? I'm like, God, but you don't need to know.
Don't want to know.
Don't want to know. Like,
No.
We have a very like what you did in the past was what you did in the past.
Yeah.
And don't want to hear about
wanna
it.
talk about it.
Don't want to meet them. Like,
Yeah.
no.
No.
It's crazy too, because I do believe our past is so interesting because it did make up who we've become today,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But it's also something that people live in.
Yeah.
And like I have friends who will come and they'll retell stories of the glory days, and I'm like,
Yeah.
can we not go down this road? As my husband's
same.
like, what
Yeah.
was that?
Did
I'm
what?
like, and the thing is, I don't really have those moments unless they're like beautiful, solid memories. But like, I don't want to recall like when I, woke up on a couch and was like, where am I? I'm like, oh, that's
Yeah.
no good.
Yeah.
Oh,
Luckily,
yeah.
my friends haven't told any of those
Yeah.
stories or anything because they didn't happen, of course.
Right. An angel.
But yeah, I was like, I don't want to hear that.
Yeah.
That she's done that. I don't want to relive my own things like
Yeah.
that. Like, being in this spot of trying to be the best man, Christian, husband, hopefully
Yeah.
dad soon that I can be.
Yeah.
I don't want to relive those things. That's not my life now. I know that they happened and I remember them and everything, but to relive them, especially in front of my wife, like, no. I'm good.
Yeah,
I'm good with
it's
that.
interesting. I'm going through this thing called EMDR, and it's it basically takes any kind of trauma that you had in the past,
Yeah.
and it basically it's rapid eye movement as I hit
Oh, yeah.
back and forth, and it untrains your brain with your thought patterns of associating negative things with trauma and feeling powerless. And I've realized there's a lot of things from my past that I kind of like put a lid on the box and was like, I don't want to go back there.
Yeah.
And then realizing that there are some things worth revisiting to not have it have so much power over you.
Yes.
So that brings me to my next question for you, Isaac,
Okay.
is you have a family that you've been pretty upfront about talking in at least the interviews I've read, that there had been just it wasn't good in your past, there was like drugs, and there was a lot of kind of disassociating yourself with a past and a childhood that was not always cloaked in sunshine,
Yeah.
right? It was cloaked in more of the darkness. So with that being said, is there a part of you that, when we talk about past relationships, that's one thing, but how do you feel about talking about your past and not letting it, I always do this dance of not letting it own me, but also knowing that it has had an effect on me.
Yeah.
Because if you have trauma in your life, it does change you.
Yeah.
So talk to me a little bit about not wanting your past to own you and being like, well, I came from this family in Kansas City, and like no one because that story is told so much for Black men, that I came from just a hard place, and that intensity, and wanting to be like, I want to move past that, versus like owning it so that when someone listens to your story, that you're more relatable, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So for me, it was really interesting because, like growing up, what I was born into was nowhere close to nice. I mean, I'm from Kansas City. I'm from this city. Was born east of Truce, born at Truman Medical Center, lived Independence and Paseo. Back then, I mean, it's not great now. Back in the 80s, it definitely wasn't great. My dad was one of the biggest drug dealers in Kansas City in the 80s. And that's what I was about to grow up into. However, my parents made a very mature decision where literally overnight we packed all our stuff up, grabbed my grandma and my aunt and my uncle, and we moved. And in the 80s, without cell phones or internet, like when you move, like people can't really reach you.
No,
you
they
know?
really can't.
So it was like literally like day and night change for us. We moved there with pretty much no money and started over. Didn't know anybody.
Wow.
And so I had that experience, but I really didn't have that experience. Like, you know what I mean? Like the traditional, stereotypical Black experience.
Yeah.
I know all about it. very, very well,
Yeah.
but didn't get to experience it as a teen or as an adult. So we moved to St. Joe, and it was very different. So we went from the hood to really being in a community with all white people.
Interesting.
All white people.
Sorry about Ace and his
Oh,
sneezing.
you're good.
He's like, all white people. He's a very black dog.
I feel you, man. So it was really interesting. So I think maybe my parents overcompensated a little bit, but I'm glad that they did, because for me, it's been able to enrich my life and my story, because I can speak from the black perspective very clearly, but I can also speak from my experiences in the white community. I've been going to all white schools since I was in 4th grade.
Yeah.
And like literally, I was one of 2 black kids in my school
That's
out of
wild.
800 people.
That's so interesting,
Yeah.
because now you're talking to me about this. So your parents obviously had a very different experience, and they're raising a child. They chose to raise a child in this environment.
Yeah.
Talk to me about feeling different from your parents.
Yeah.
Because that must have been really strange.
Yeah. So one cool thing that my parents did is they didn't try to shelter any kind of existence from me. So even though we ran from the experience that we were in, because we literally had to for our lives, we still, I still have, all my family's black, and we would still go back and see people, and they told me every single thing that they had ever done. They were very transparent with me.
That's great.
And so it was so cool because they didn't hide it. They didn't hide that life. They let me know about it. And I think that's one of the best things that they could have done, because I knew how it could affect you.
Yeah.
And they showed me better, and they showed me where they came from, and they didn't say, don't do that. They just said, we've showed you all sides of the spectrum, make your decision. So it informed me on how to live my life. And so what I will say is I grew up in kind of a whitewashed way of, since I'm around all white people, this is the way I'm supposed to live as a black man, is I'm supposed to try to be more white. And I will say that screwed me up for a very long time.
Yeah.
And my parents apologized to me, and they said they didn't do me any service. And I was like, you did. You loved me unconditionally. You put me in an environment that was extremely safe. You showed me all spectrums of how people could act and how they look and all these kind of things. And you made me a free thinker, because they never dictated really what I did. They just said, here's our morals and our values and who we are as Christians and people, and then go do your thing. Make mistakes if you're going to, but you'll learn from them.
Yeah.
And that was really, really cool. And we've had a lot of those conversations, and I don't put anything on my parents in a negative way, because I think they raised me perfectly.
Yeah.
So perfect.
Well, and they did the best they could.
Yeah, they
I mean,
really
I
did.
think under the circumstances,
Yeah.
I mean, right now we are literally the most empowered generation in terms of the fact that we can access different stories, different people, just because we have a phone and a computer. And we can actually, if we so choose, to educate ourselves and listen to people's experiences.
Yeah.
That's why this podcast for me was really important, was because I realized that I was a good communicator, but my listening skills were a little off. I was good at listening, but I was really thinking ahead of time about where I could jump in and tell my own story. And then I realized that my story is great, but it's how much better would it be if I would just sit and listen to another person's story and see how it enhanced or shed light or allowed me to understand maybe some things in my own life that maybe I could improve upon and be better. I think our family's generation was kind of taught that they could do anything because they came from like World War II parents, and their parents were like, we were through a war, and we did this, and we were through the Depression, and then what they tried to do instead of do anything is they tried to do everything.
Yeah.
And then I see the pain in my own parents, to where there was like some denial of like where you come from, and then and trying to change your life completely to mirror what you think is the good way or the light way or the successful way. And thinking about the darkness of my own dad's history, in his own culture, my mom's own culture, and that whole denial
Yep.
It doesn't exist. And that's where I think it becomes traumatic, is where we are so on the defense or offense one way or the other. We're either defending ourselves to where we're like, we can never ever like stand up on our soapbox and tell our story, or it's the other where we're so busy telling our story and condemning everybody else and denying anything else. And it's that middle ground of coming together. So it's interesting, because one thing I read that you had said in your bio was that you like stand-up comedy.
Yeah.
So there has been a resurgence in stand-up comedy that to me is like this little, it's criticized in some ways because it is taking self-deprecation away. It's more about kind of the TED Talk of, let me tell you a story, and I'm going to play on your heart lines of compassion. I'm going to make you laugh because you relate to this painful story, and I'm going to make fun of myself. But then I'm going to make you feel something, almost to where you're laughing and crying because it's so truthful. So for me, I wanted to first ask you, because I literally have a list of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 comics that have literally been like going to church for me. I can only describe it because I laughed and I cried.
I'm interested to hear this list.
So I wanted to know I first want to know who you are listening to, because I'd like to know what comedy has resonated with you.
Oh man. Well, Kevin Hart has always been like one of my favorites. He's just hilarious and wacky, and I just love listening to him. But I think in like the newer kind of stand-ups that are coming out, the ones that you're kind of talking about, Aziz Ansari.
Yes. Yeah.
His newest stand-up that came out like a year or so ago was so good. And he's always been really good about tying in some like big ticket issues into his stand-up. Like he's really good about talking about women's rights. And then this last one, he was good about being vulnerable and saying like, hey, like I've been speaking up against this, and I made a mistake. Yeah. And so yeah, he's great. I love him. Cat Williams. We listened to Cat Williams like a week or so ago, his one that he did last year, and that was
so good.
So good.
Yeah. It's kind of great. How about for you?
Well, I'm laughing because she listens to so much comedy.
I do.
Yeah.
So many people. I didn't even know where she was going to go at with like who was her favorite.
Yeah. I've been really diving into comedy because when you're in this forum, right? I was talking to you guys earlier before we got on the mics about how I love having these conversations, and I'm good here. But then when I have to sit with it later, there's a real sense of like holding the story and letting it hit my heart, and then reflecting on my own life. And then I feel so depleted. Like I ran a race and all I did was sit on a frickin' cushion and have a conversation. So what I love about these comedy specials lately has been this beauty of self-reflection with laughter that's not self-deprecating. So the ones that I've really been I think it first started weirdly enough with a white man, Patton Oswalt.
Oh yeah, he's funny.
He did this one called Talking for Clapping. And the reason why I really... it was the first time I had ever seen a comedy special to where someone brought up a very sad topic, which is the death of his wife. And she was interesting because she was a very big advocate for, there was I believe a serial killer and women's rights. And she wrote this incredible book, and he has a daughter with her, and he thought his life was over. And I related to it because my husband, his first wife passed away. So there was this real sense of like, understanding my husband through this beautiful comedy, and crying and laughing and being like, I would never know, but the beauty of the storytelling. And then that opened the door to there is obviously Chris Rock and Kevin Hart, which was really cool to watch such tough, like their comedy was sexist and a little off, when you say off color, even there are men of color, like stuff that I was like, I would get a little turned off. It's like, when you would watch Whitney Cummings when she first came out and it was like vagina, vagina, vagina. And you're like, oh God, like, I want to laugh, but like my vagina is getting a little weird. So like, but I loved her comedy special where she was talking about, she had the robot doll. I don't know if you saw that, but she literally made a sex robot of herself.
Oh my gosh.
It's so great. You've got to watch it. But really trying to talk about the Me Too movement and like, what does it feel like?
Yeah.
But the ones that I've really been like blown away by there is Hannah Gadsby. Nanette.
I don't know any of these people.
Yeah, you'll love this one. And I'm telling you, like the Loose movie, we're gonna have to have a conversation afterwards.
Let's do it.
But Nanette is about a lesbian, she's a lesbian, Hannah Gadsby, and she talks about just feeling like she doesn't want to do comedy anymore, that self-deprecates against her and making, she told a story about her hitting on a woman, and long story short, the guy, the boyfriend of the girl that she was giving the eye to, was like, hey, and thought she was a man because of the way she was dressed, and almost came at her. And then in her comedy sketch she says, I'm a girl. The sad part about it is that even though she gets a laugh out of that and said the guy backed off, the truth of the matter is he didn't back off and she got the shit beaten out of her. So so she does this comedy where you're like, oh, and she's one of them. And then Kanan Gill, he's an Indian guy who is like Aziz Ansari, and he did this beautiful one called Is Yours Sincerely, because a lot of Indian culture has, like when we say sincerely yours, they actually say yours sincerely. So a little different, but like it means the same. So these beautiful ways of showing culturally diversity, what these things that are out there that can be really painful, but we need to have this lighter perspective on things. So I love that you said that, because I think we need to laugh, but not at the price of others or at the cost of others or ourselves.
Yeah. Totally.
I think you two are just better people than me, because my favorite comedians are, well, I'll just tell you.
No, go for it.
My new one right now that I'm pretty obsessed with is Andrew Scholes.
I haven't watched it, so I'm going to write that down. Andrew Scholes. All right, cool.
He's great.
Yeah.
He's hilarious. He has 2 podcasts that he does. One with Charlemagne the God.
I love Charlemagne the God. Yeah.
Called Brilliant Idiots. And then he does another one with another comedian. I can never say his name, but it's so good. It's called Flagrant 2.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Charlemagne the God is an interesting guy.
He's very interesting, and honestly, I don't know if I'm a fan. He's
kind of polarizing in some ways, but then in other ways, I have to say, from where he came from, it's kind of like, Wendy Williams and all of that, where they were really just, they said some shit that, whoa.
He's calmed down a lot in how much he insults people, because I feel like that was his mission and his goal in life back in the day, and he really doesn't do it that much anymore on that. But the other one is Dave Chappelle.
Dave Chappelle's great.
He's a legend for me, and it's kind of tough because he does, he does a lot of stand-up comedy that is like tearing groups down and everything, and I don't condone that at all. And it's hard to pick and choose what you like about a person. But he's been someone who's been such a thought leader in standing up for not only the Black community, but he stands up for a lot of different groups of people. And the interesting thing is, like, he makes fun of everyone, but supports everyone. It's a weird dichotomy how he does that. He's just so good, though. He's just a legend. How he tells stories from the stage on, Black rights or LGBTQ and whatnot. It's just, he does it in such a creative way that you can really understand and get behind. Those are my 2.
I love hearing it, because again, it's like listening to your favorite music. What gets you going. So you guys are still somewhat newlyweds, and one of my favorite questions to ask is, like, if you had a dinner party, dead or alive, You get to pick 2 to the dinner party, and you get to pick 2 to the dinner party. Ooh. Who would they be and why?
Who's cooking at the dinner party?
Because I know it ain't me.
I would have to say my dad. He passed away whenever I was 17. So I would like to have him there to meet Isaac. Yeah. And, gosh, there's so many people. We need a bigger.
Say Kevin Hart.
No,
I'll say 3. I'll let you each have 3 because normally I say 3.
Yeah. Okay.
So 3's good.
Paul McCartney, because I'm a huge Beatles fan, obsessed. And I'm going to have a comedian there, obviously. So probably Aziz.
Yeah. I love that. That's a good mix.
Yeah,
and interesting that it's 3 men, because that's the other thing that I realized too is, I come from a family of 4 girls. Mm-hmm. And when it comes to this question, a lot of times every once in a while, it depends on my mood, but it's usually 3 men that I have. So how about for you?
Funny.
So I actually did this exercise recently. So my first one is Obama.
Yeah.
I agree with most of his politics. Some of it I don't, but it's more of how he carries himself. Mm-hmm. He had so much pressure and so many eyes on himself during his presidency, and he still stayed above reproach as far as his character and his morals, his values, how he respected his wife and his kids, how he respected every human. I don't know another person alive now that could have done that with so much grace and bringing us together, or trying to bring us together as a country. So Obama first. Second one is Martin Luther King Jr. Mm-hmm. Because as we're going through all of this, is like the second wave of civil rights that we're going through, and we're doing all this studying of these amazing people who've come before us. Like, he is just the guy that I always go back to. And I want to go deeper than his quotes. His quotes are great, but I want to hear full messages. I want to hear how he handled situations and whatnot. And I think that has given me a lot of healing in the way of my views on the Black Lives Matter movement and how we can heal as a Black community. Because, he just had very different views, and people take it out of context.
Yeah.
The third would be Kobe Bryant.
Very cool. That's a solid list.
Yeah. Squad.
Wow. So
fun party.
I know, right? It'd be a great dinner.
Yeah.
And then you'd be the only girl.
I'd be
get all the attention. I love it.
They better not look at you. Touch you.
I love it. He's
not jealous at all.
You're like
right?
Martin Luther and Kobe.
Yeah, just watch it.
But it's funny how
social distancing, 6 feet.
Right? It's so funny though how you it changes for me from day to day with that guest list. But what I love about it is the idea of these 3 pillars of your personality. And it's pretty cool because you get to know a lot about a person based on that day or where they are in their life when you ask that question. So then I guess I turn to, as we start to close out this conversation, you are a part of the wellness community. You work with Flexi Body Babes, and what a great company.
Shout out Flexi.
I love those girls.
Yeah.
What has since you've been with Isaac, what's changed in your health and wellness journey? How you look at health and wellness, and what because it's what you do each day. Mm-hmm. So I'm sure your voice has matured, and you say he's like kind of a mirror to you. What's changed? What's changed in you, not just professionally, but also what has he brought out of you that you never knew existed?
Hopefully it's good.
No, it's good. He has brought a bravery out in me. I am typically more introverted and shy and have never looked at myself as a leader. Whenever I even originally went through yoga teacher training, I was like, I don't know if I even want to teach. I just want to get deeper into the practice. Thinking of standing up and teaching in front of people terrified me. And thankfully I did end up teaching. But with him, he has always encouraged me to like do more and told me like I'm way more capable of things than I give myself credit for. And even with like business, I've, you know, always been like, I don't know anything about business. Like, just you handle that. I'll handle just the teaching part. And he's always like, you are business minded. You just don't realize it. And so he brings different things out and of that. Like, yeah. And
I love. Well, you actually struck a chord with me, because I am going to ask you, what has been the hardest part about being in a relationship with Isaac?
Ooh, goodness. So many hard parts.
Oh, man.
Yeah, just
And
kidding.
again, it doesn't have to necessarily be personal, but
Yeah.
you know, I mean, it's obvious, you guys, you're white, you're black. And you
Yeah.
know, when you think about, there's a lot of things when I think about my own husband, you know, there's a lot of differences.
Yeah.
But I'm looking first superficially. And if you want to go there, I know I do. I like to go there.
Let's go deep.
Yeah.
Well, if I'm being, you know, totally honest, I think the hardest part is I come from a divorced family. There's been lots of, not in my parents, but in other members of my family, infidelity. My own past relationships, I've experienced lots of infidelity. And I have trust issues that I'm, you know, I've done a lot of healing work on, but they are still very much there. Isaac, you know, he has experienced, you know, things like that as well, but he was able to, like, you know, let it go for the most part. And he's, you know, a very outgoing person and always very friendly. And that was really hard for me, especially like getting into a relationship with him, being a yoga teacher surrounded by women. I was like, you know, I'd go to the studio with him, and of course, like, you know,
The familiarity.
Isaac,
Yeah.
oh my God, I love you. Like, I was always like, what is going on over here?
Yeah.
Like, so,
I get it.
Yeah.
Ooh, me and my husband are jealous. We still are. That's why we go to therapy.
Yeah.
I
Yes.
think there's some good to that as
Therapy
well.
is
Yeah,
Being
it
a
is.
little bit of jealous.
Yeah, a little bit, yes. But we definitely had to talk through like boundaries and respect, you know, rational boundaries, not like, you can't look at I saw you made eye contact with her. No, like nothing like that, but just things like, you know, healthy things for our relationship, talking those things out. I think that was like the hardest part of starting our relationship.
Yeah. What a beautiful balance. Now for you with Rachel, we'll go
So
negative,
easy.
positive.
Okay.
So what's been the hardest, biggest challenge with being in a relationship with Rachel?
No pressure.
No pressure. You're only being recorded, where this can be played back by a lot of people. No, I'm kidding.
Pressure's on. So one thing about Rachel, if you know her, she's a very grounded and introspective person. She sees everything.
Yeah.
She feels it. She understands things. And that was really hard for me, someone who's always had identity issues.
Uh-huh.
Literally, she's been like my mirror.
Wow.
And we've been that for each other, but it's hard growing up someone who's pretty insecure.
Yeah.
And I'm naturally extroverted.
Yeah.
But wanting attention and feeling like I needed attention all the time.
Yeah.
It was hard because when we were dating, she would really challenge me on that, and I hated that because I'm so used to getting attention, being an athlete, and all these different things. And so that was honestly one of our biggest arguments that we had in our relationship. Was that no one likes to be called out for something that they hold dear. Like, I
and
love
denying
getting attention.
yourself.
You know what
I had
mean?
to go through the same thing.
Yeah.
You know, it's denying yourself of that approval. And I think when if you did come from a place where I had imposter syndrome forever because I was always a new girl in school.
Yeah.
And then, we had a lot of hard times with finances. So I didn't have all the nice things.
Yeah.
So for me, having people's approval, especially men's approval, validated me in some way, and even though I was like, there was no intention of stepping outside of a relationship, a lot of times it made me feel like if this relationship didn't work out, well, then there's 10 or 15 others that would, and that's like, I don't know. It's hard. It's hard to face that about yourself.
It really is.
Yeah.
It was hard and still is. Now that we've been together for 4 years and married for 2.5, I already know what she's gonna say. Yeah. So how people back in the day used to wear like the bracelets that like, what would Jesus do? WWJD.
Yes, totally.
Mine is like WWRD. What would Rachel do, or what would Rachel say?
I love that.
So it's an easier bounce back. And what I've learned is she has my best interest at heart. Sometimes it may come from a spot of her insecurity. However, as her husband, who cares? Because I'm also trying to help her through her stuff while she's helping me through my stuff. Yeah. So if I'm in the wrong, then I need to change it. If I'm doing something that's offending her, that's lying on her insecurity, I still need to change it, and then we'll have a conversation about it later. Yeah. So it's...
How has she made you a better man?
And the list is so long.
I love that song, by the way. It's literally like what I preach to my husband every day. I'm like, how can we be a better woman, a better man? Yeah. You don't have to be perfect, but how does Rachel
just
make you?
Just getting better every single day.
Yeah.
I would say I've gotten a chance to learn a lot from her.
Yeah.
She explained that, I'm in business, and I like business and leadership and that kind of stuff. I love empowering people and calling them up and calling them out. But sometimes I'm not graceful with things. Mm-hmm. And if you know me at a deep level, I have a big heart. But in a lot of different scenarios, I don't lead with that. Sometimes I am a little like, well, yesterday she just said that I'm mean. Sometimes I could be mean. I'm very intense in a business setting because I'm always the boss.
Yeah.
I'm a business owner. So every group that I'm in, I'm the leader of the group. I'm leading the group, whether it's a church or my stores or friend group or whatever it is. So it's hard for me to shut that off, especially at home.
Yeah.
And so she's taught me how to be more humble.
Yeah.
I struggle with ego, I can admit that.
Yeah.
To be more graceful in situations and in conversations and my nonverbals.
Yeah.
And that has made me a better husband. It's made me a better man. It's made me a better Christian. It's made me a better leader. It's made me a better manager of people as well. I'm way more empathetic than I was before. Definitely more compassionate. I would say that I've been very jaded through things that I've been through, and she's allowed me to be my true self, my true weird, loving self, because guys aren't supposed to be that. We're supposed to be closed off and tough.
Yeah.
I played sports all the way through college, so that's ingrained in you. Like, don't show emotion.
Yeah.
Don't be weak. True men, all the stuff of the stereotype of men. And so she's really helped me, like, break down those stereotypes of how a man's supposed to act and get down to the true me. So, yeah.
I love that. I think it's so interesting because between the two of you, and again, knowing like from our first interview and, it being just getting to know you, right? And now, the fact that you're involved with so many cool things. Not only are you co-owners of Yogurtini, and by the way, if you want to support not just a Black business, but culturally just a cool couple that is socially aware, just all around good people that are trying to create jobs in this time, please, Yogurtini, if you're feeling like a little bit of something cool and sweet, check out and support a locally owned business. Yeah. You can also find Rachel through It's Flexi. And then where else are you teaching? Are you teaching?
I'm all the places. Power Life. I teach at Corinth and at Town Center, teaching bar there. And then Core Energy in Overland Park. Yes,
Very
hot
cool.
yoga.
Very cool.
She's
and how
a
about
badass trainer.
I
She'll-
love-
Oh my gosh.
she'll kick your ass.
Yeah, and
So-
smile while I'm doing it.
Right.
Yeah. Which makes it worse because like if you got a rude trainer, you're like, okay,
Oh,
I see
totally.
you, like you're putting me through this, but she's like smiling, like this is fun.
Totally.
Like no, it's not.
Namaste. Right?
Right.
How about you? Are you currently teaching anywhere?
I am not.
You aren't,
So
yeah.
I actually stopped teaching yoga in 2017. Took about 3 months off and said I'm good for a while, and
Yeah.
then had a couple conversations with a friend and got recruited to start a nonprofit called Superhero Yoga, where still in the yoga world we teach trauma-informed yoga to kids in under-resourced areas in schools during their day.
Oh, I
And
love
so
that.
No more
Yeah.
teaching, but more of the stuff that I'm just better at, building business, administrative, and letting other people who are way better at teaching than me do their thing.
I
like
love
Rachel.
it. Do you know Electra Hendrickson at all? She was on my 3rd podcast. She also does trauma-based yoga. Really cool. She'd be. I love intermixing
Yeah.
people. She's a
Connect.
great teacher.
Please.
Yeah.
And it's just cool to watch you both. Little by little, like it's just interesting to watch people evolve, and then even more so, seeing a relationship to where you do make each other more powerful, which that's like, it's pretty great. And when I say, power couple, I think it's the definition of power couple, because you both have observed you in powerless moments, and you insert yourselves in those areas to help build and rebuild from the place of powerlessness into your place of power, because you both did it on your own for a while, but it sure feels good to have like the Batman to your Robin, or the Robin to your Batman, or the Batman to your Batman, because I mean, you guys really are each other's Batmans.
Superman to Supergirl.
I love it, right? Totally. Well, I have loved this conversation, and if you have liked this conversation, please subscribe to the Seraphine podcast. The more that we get for people watching, the more that their stories get to be shared. And this is a really good story. It's an inspirational story. It's a story that matters right now. It really does, because I think we need more stories that aren't boxed into this is what a couple looks like that's a Christian, or this is a couple that's a biracial couple. It's just great to have conversations and be who you are with each other.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. And last little plugs, where they can find you online. I think it's Rachel Collins.
Yep.
And then you are Isaac Lee Collins.
Isaac
right?
Lee Collins on
That's
Instagram
right.
and Facebook.
Yeah, perfect. And like I said, go get that yoga routine. I'll see you guys later. See you on the flip side. Bye.